Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome to the Tech Rundown, the show where we talk about the latest things that are happening in tech in a hopefully not completely boring way. In today's show, we are going to ask whether or not it's right for your government to ban social media for children under the age of 16. The story behind Jaguar's disastrous rebrand, coming from someone who's actually owned two of them, why splitting Google and Chrome is going to be a disaster, and more. And remember that if you enjoy watching me and want to see me discuss more tech, I'm also on David Bull's weekend breakfast show on Talk in the UK on Sundays at 7:20 AM, where I discuss these stories and more. So let's get to the first story, and it's a development of a story that we covered a couple of weeks ago actually. So back then, in Australian Parliament, there was a discussion led by Minister for Communications Michelle Rowland that a ban on social media for people under the age of 16 should be enforced. How it was going to be done, they had no idea. Was there actual evidence that this would help with mental health with teenagers and that they wouldn't just find distressing content elsewhere? Well, that wasn't discussed either. Okay, so I might sound harsh, but the social media ban isn't completely unprecedented. In France, the minimal age to access social media is 15. However, you can get parental exemptions, and in the US, it is 13. However, there is barely any enforcement. Well, this week, Technology Secretary Peter Kyle in the UK said in response to a question on whether or not he was going to follow Australia's example, he said that everything was on the table, but he would wait for more evidence before following suit. Now, for once, this is a minister who's actually talking sense, because he said that a potential social media ban is just a drop in an ocean-sized problem, saying that teenagers would just find new ways to access problematic material online. Kyle actually met a group of teenagers at the headquarters of the NSPCC in London to talk about the harms of social media, and while they did complain about how addictive social media platforms are and the difficulty in reporting hacked accounts and also in reporting distressing content, none of them wanted a ban. And that's because these platforms also do a social good. They foster communication, access to support, and even safety. And let's face it, if social media were banned, teenagers would find a workaround in about 5 seconds. So while I'm not saying that social media is great for all teenagers, what I do believe in is that probably 13 is a reasonable age for teenagers to be introduced to them. By then, most teenagers should be mature enough, and I mean, at some point, we all have to be introduced to exist in this modern world. And the next story is about Jaguar. I mean, it's no secret that Jaguar is my favorite car brand. I've owned 2 different XJRs already. I practically feature it on my phone as a wallpaper in every video I make. And while I have hoped that the new relaunch would make some people notice, little did I expect it to be the largest story of the week, and even for Elon Musk to comment on it. So for context, Jaguar is going through a little bit of a rough period. Under previous leadership, Jaguar was actually doing reasonably. Throughout the 2010s, Jaguar was gradually building up their customer base, and while there were challenges, namely switching to diesel just when everyone was moving away, and also creating 2 very expensive saloons just as everyone was switching to SUVs, in 2017, Jaguar had their highest sales ever. And then in 2020, Thierry Bolloré came as CEO from Renault. Not only did he discontinue the upcoming electric XJ and hybrid flagship J-Pace SUV, but he also practically discontinued all development of existing vehicles, including the then class-leading I-Pace electric SUV. But he also announced that by 2025, that all existing vehicles would be discontinued and be replaced with 3 electric vehicles costing well over £100,000. This decision basically killed the brand. While he was ousted just a year later, the new CEO, Adrian Mardell, is staying on the same strategy. And now we've reached a point in 2024 where you can't buy a single new Jaguar until the new car comes out in 2026. A car brand taking a break. Now that is unprecedented, and it's also completely tragic. However, this week they decided to announce a new logo and a new ad campaign. And let me just say that as a Jaguar owner, I am aghast and also dismayed by the new direction that the brand is going in. This new font is ghastly. It looks more like a James Charles Morphy collaboration than something pertaining to a premium car brand with over 100 years of proud heritage. And don't get me started with the scrapping of the iconic Growler logo as well, that has spanned generations from XK120 to E-Type and XKR. This medallion just looks incredibly generic in comparison. At least the new reverse sleeper looks okay. But God almighty, the worst thing is probably the video campaign, because what the hell is this? It is the most awful woke piece of marketing material I have ever seen. Again, this would work for a launch of a new James Charles collection, but definitely not for a new Jaguar. Even after the backlash, Jaguar doubled down on the ad and called everyone complaining about it racist, sexist, and homophobic. Well, I'm sorry, but this is completely besides the point. We don't like the ad because it represents everything that Jaguar isn't, not because we can't accept a little bit of diversity on our screens. While this new campaign does seem to be a massive mistake on Jaguar's part, it's actually given the brand a lot of publicity. In fact, I don't think that Jaguar has ever trended on Twitter before, yet alone seen this much free publicity from media publications worldwide. Currently, the brand is in hiatus. They don't sell any cars at the moment, so all eyes are on the relaunch, with a new electric concept car being unveiled in Miami on December the 2nd. And this made me think, maybe this controversy was done on purpose, and there is evidence for this. If we were to look at the Twitter activity of Jaguar's head of public relations, Ken McConomy, he says that the overwhelmingly negative comments about the rebrand was indeed achieving the goal of the brand, and he called the campaign mission accomplished. Looking at the gorgeous proportions of the spy images of the new car, and I'm going to assume that it's an XJ, despite the car being electric, I do have higher hopes for the model. Obviously a V12 would be better, but it does unfortunately make sense for it to be electric, for a V12 would be banned in a few years anyway. And the teaser images, while it does look a little bit like a Cybertruck, we've got to remember that it's just a concept car, and quite often Jaguar concept cars look very different from the production models. At the end of the day, the marketing did its job. We might not like it, but perhaps for the first time in 60 years, people are finally taking notice of Jaguar. Next up, we have to talk about Ford of Europe, and I'm afraid that they might be making all of the same mistakes as Jaguar, putting all of their eggs in the electric basket, just as the zeitgeist is moving back towards internal combustion-based vehicles. Ford this week announced that they will be cutting 4,000 jobs in Europe and 800 in the UK due to, you've guessed it, a slowdown in EV sales. For context, especially for people in America, Ford is perhaps the most chameleon of all car brands, because while it is intrinsically American, in a lot of markets, people are completely convinced otherwise. For example, in Australia, Ford once had a very strong local design and manufacturing base, so people in Australia considered it to be largely Australian. Likewise, people in Germany feel that Ford is very German, despite the company's American roots. And perhaps where this is most well felt is in the UK, where Ford is almost considered a local institution, because so many models from the Mondeo to the Focus to the Fiesta were made for the UK in mind. Unfortunately though, over the past few years, Ford has discontinued all of the cars that the UK audience likes, including the likes of the aforementioned Mondeo, the top-selling Fiesta, and now the Focus. And they've been replaced with a new Explorer and Capri electric SUVs that start at a whopping £40,000. And that is a long way from the likes of a Fiesta, which began at around 10 grand not that many years ago. And somehow Ford is now surprised that the new models have failed. These cuts represent 14% of Ford's workforce in Europe, and they'll be completed by the end of 2027. While it's easy to blame all of this failure on the car brand, I feel that the blame also needs to be put on the governments here. You simply can't force an entire populace to purchase electric cars that are not only super expensive, but are not convenient for everyone. So many people in Europe don't have a place to charge at home, and public chargers are not only often more expensive than petrol, but are also ridiculously inconvenient. While I do agree that net zero is important for the future of the planet, I believe that we should give car manufacturers the choice of how to get there. There's no way that you can convince me that an electric Cybertruck is better for the environment than a tiny little Ford Ka. And unfortunately, with the new government restrictions, it is these economical hatchbacks that have gone the way of the dodo. Next up, we have Google, and another example of government department simply not understanding how technology companies work. The US Department of Justice, who is well known these days for trying to split up technology companies under monopoly laws, well, this week is arguing that Google must sell the Chrome browser to break their monopoly on online search. But the list of demands goes on. They also insist that Google must share the data and search results with rivals. They must stop paying companies like Apple and Samsung to make Google the default search engine, and must also not re-enter the browser space for up to 5 years. And if this all fails, they also insist that Google must sell the Android operating system. Now, this is absolutely insane. Well, I do believe that it would be desirable for Google to have some competition in the search space, as having 90% of the market share is clearly not healthy nor desirable at all. But this is simply not the way of doing it. I actually do believe that competition is coming, but perhaps not in the way that we expect. For example, ChatGPT's search engine is looking very promising, and more people are actually using TikTok as a search engine instead of Google. Perhaps it might be better to foster these alternatives rather than force Google to be less competitive. Google's search and advertising business, which is largely built into search, is currently a $175 billion business. And if we were to add YouTube ads on top of that, that makes up roughly 77% of Google's total revenue. And it is this revenue that helps support the other projects like the Chromium browser project and also the Android operating system. These are monetized through Google search being integrated directly into these products. What the DOJ seems to fail to understand is that without Google search, Android and Chrome simply can't exist. And if they were to be separated, then I'm afraid that it might be the end of Android and also the Chrome browser. And on a side note, if Google were to stop paying companies to make their search engine the default, then I'm afraid that this would mean the end of Mozilla, as that is practically the only way that they fund the Firefox browser. In 2022, Google gave Mozilla $480 million to make Google the default search engine, which was 81% of Mozilla's entire revenue. And that would mean that Chromium would be even more so the overwhelming web browser technology than it already is today. At the moment, Chrome, Edge, Samsung Internet, Opera, and more are all based on Chromium, and combined they have over 60% of market share. And onto our final story, and it seems like that Google may be taking a break from tablets, which feels definitely like deja vu. And the story is that development of the Pixel Tablet 2 and 3 have both been discontinued this week. Android Headlines and Android Authority this week have reported on the demise of both products, and this means that last year's Pixel tablet will remain a standalone product. Yep, despite it being a fairly low effort product with fairly ordinary specs, but with an interesting dock accessory, it seems like its sales were so disastrous that they aren't even going to lightly update it to create a replacement product. And I'm sorry, but there is a reason why Apple is the only real player in the tablet market, and that is because they are consistent. Both the BlackBerry Playbook and HP Touchpad were single generation products. Windows threw out everything they worked on to make Windows 8 finger friendly as soon as they got some backlash, and then they revealed Windows 8.1. And Google's strategy, well, it's been more inconsistent than anyone's. First there was the Motorola Zoom tablet that was an iPad competitor. Then there were the budget Nexus 7 tablets that were iPad mini competitors, with the half-hearted Nexus 8 and 10 tablets that soon followed. And then there was a massive hiatus when they had seemingly given up on Android tablets for good. And then the Pixel Slate came out with Chrome OS, which was awful. Then they decided to give up on Chrome OS tablets, switch back to Android, and that's how we got the Pixel tablet. And now that is gone as well. Just a bit of consistency, Google, and I'm sure that you can carve out a little bit of a niche for yourself in the tablet market. And that brings us to the end of this week's Tech Rundown. Remember, if you would like to see these topics and more discussed, tune in to David Bull's Weekend Breakfast on Talk on Sunday mornings. I'm on at 7:20 AM in the UK. You can find them on YouTube as well. If you want to support my channel as well, you can check out the Black Friday sale for the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. They are seriously one of the coolest gadgets that I use. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video as well. Comment any thoughts that you've got on any of the stories. And until next week, toodaloo.